Imagine this. You and your significant other are leaving the grocery store and walk into your car through an unlit parking lot. Suddenly, two men appear. One is wielding a pistol and begins to open fire on you two. Depending on the laws of your state is what can happen next. If you live in a stand your ground law state, you are legally allowed to defend yourself with the use of a weapon. This is the exact same scenario that happened to a man named B.J. Baldwin. According to the article, Baldwin Motorsports president kills man in self-defense by Lucas Wright, posted on the 8 News Now Las Vegas website, last updated in April 2020, states that B.J. Baldwin and his fiancée were walking through a parking lot in the exact scenario that I laid out, and he successfully defended themselves from these attackers. Deadly force is never a one outcome, but if you live in a stand your ground law state, you won't be punished by law if it comes down to that. Many times, just showing your weapon will persuade your attackers to not attack, and will make them retreat. However, this isn't always the case, so many citizens want to be protected legally if deadly force is required. The stand your ground law is a very controversial law, and the issue on whether to repeal, revise, or support as is a heated debate throughout the country. Today I will explain to you the problems before and after the stand your ground law was implemented, some solutions to these problems, and why the stand your ground law should be supported across the country, as well as some steps that y'all can take to support it. The first point you need to know are the problems before and after the stand your ground law was created. But first, let me explain the stand your ground law. According to a newspress.com article titled, "What is Florida's Stand Your Ground Law?" Here are 5 questions and answers to explain by Rachel Thomas, last updated January 2020, says that a person is justified in using or threatening to use deadly force if he or she reasonably believes that using or threatening to use such force is necessary to prevent imminent death or great bodily harm to himself or herself or another, or to prevent the imminent commission of a forcible felony. Currently, 27 states enforce the stand your ground law, with Florida being the first one of these states to create it. The latest poll on this subject, put out by Quinnipiac University website in 2013, states that 53% of Americans support this law. The reason the stand your ground laws were created was because citizens wanted to be able to defend themselves without facing legal trouble or jail time if they did. However, despite this law's intentions, the stand your ground law has its flaws. The first flaw is that the law has created some confusion with the duty to retreat clause. According to the article Stand Your Ground versus Duty to Retreat by Amy Karst, posted on the LawyersUSNews.com website in February of 2020, states that this clause states that legally impose the duty to retreat, the use of lethal force to defend yourself is typically only allowed as a last resort measure. This clause could create confusion as to when one is legally allowed to defend themselves or when one must legally retreat from the scene. The second flaw is that this law has been abused and used as an invitation to kill in some scenarios. The law has overreached and protected the aggressor in these scenarios as well. The article, The Stand Your Ground Law Protects Those Who Go Far Beyond That Point, by Ben Montgomery, posted on the TampaBayTimes.com in June of 2012, gives an example of this with Grayson Garcia. Grayson Garcia was a man who looked outside his house one day and saw a robber stealing radios out of the bed of his truck. Instead of calling the police like he should have, he ran, grabbed a kitchen knife, and gave pursuit to this man. 2 blocks later, he caught up to him. The man swung the bag of radios at him to defend himself, and Grayson killed the man with the kitchen knife. However, he was found innocent in the court of law, citing the Stand Your Ground law as his defense. This should not be allowed. Many Americans still wanted to defend themselves, so the law must be made clear. The final flaw is that the Stand Your Ground law has fueled racial tension in our country. According to the previous Tampa Bay Times article, some of these scenarios, such as Trayvon Martin versus Zimmerman, have sparked outrage, riots, and protests all throughout our country. Now that you know some of the problems of this law before and after it was created, let's talk about some solutions to these problems. In order to please both sides of the issue, the Stand Your Ground law needs to be kept as is, with some changes added to it. Some potential revisions of this law could be change the burden of proof from the defendant to from the prosecution to the defendant. If the defendant was truly in the right, he should easily be able to defend himself. The law needs to state some limitations, such as if you provoke the innocent, you can't use it as your defense. And the final point that needs to be changed is that you can't leave the scene of the incident and give chase like Grayson Garcia did. This should be considered retaliation and should not be allowed. So how can these be implemented? Well, your state legislature needs to make these changes and then vote to change the stand your ground law. Another way to make this law safer is to create more awareness of your state gun laws, such as when you purchase a firearm, you should be made aware of the stand your ground law status in your state as well as other laws, and in concealed carry classes, since these members will be carrying pistols on a regular basis, they need to be well versed in these laws. Finally, if someone is found guilty of abusing this law, they need to be charged with the crime that they committed, such as in the case of Grayson Garcia. He should have been charged with murder and not have gotten off for his crime. Lastly, I will tell you my stance on the issue as well as some action steps for the community to take. I believe that the stand your ground law should be supported because this law has saved hundreds of thousands of innocent lives each year. According to the article on the Wentworth Report website written by David Evans, in April of 2016, guns save more lives than they take, prevent more injuries than they inflict. Guns are used to defend against criminals up to 2.5 million times each year, though only fired in 8% of those instances, which is 80 times more than they are used to take lives. If the changes that I propose are put into law, even more lives will be saved, since it will shy people away from making rash decisions. If the changes that I propose are not put into law, there will still be ways to abuse this law, with many lives being lost. Some action steps for you to take are, you can call your state lawmakers or legislatures and express your concerns to them, donate to causes that support these changes, organize a protest in your community on these problems, or even sign petitions that cover this issue. Today I explained to you the problems before and after the stand your ground law was implemented, the solutions to these problems, as well as my stance on why the stand your ground law should be supported. As stated previously, the stand your ground law is a very controversial subject, and the issue on whether to repeal, revise, or leave it as is a heated debate all across America. The United States is the freest nation in the world, largely due to our great Constitution. The Second Amendment in our Constitution states that we have the right to bear arms. Many states have legalized the stand your ground law, and the citizens in those states, including B.J. Baldwin, have become much safer because of it. We must support the stand your ground law, as well as campaign that the changes that I laid out be added to it. If these changes are made, we will not only have a much safer country, but this law will be free from any dangerous loopholes. Let me close with a quote from the NRA. It is better, the only thing that stops a bad guy with a gun is a good guy with a gun.